Go ahead.
I'll be doing the introduction today. Also here with us, your Deputy City Manager, Matthew Chittister, of course, your Chief of Police, Captain Sal Lopez. We're going to have a presentation made today by two of our staff in the City Manager and City Clerk's office, Corey Stalker, Jonathan Roisman. Jessica Blair is also here to help us get through the meeting. And I see that we have 8 members of the public here for this subcommittee meeting. So I assume you'll want to hear from them and take comments from them at some point during the agenda as well. By way, and the process will go, I'll give a short introduction here to give some context of how we got here and what we're trying to accomplish and what it is that the subcommittee has asked us to do. We then will, like I say, have the presentation, some research that's been done by Corey and Jonathan, take the public comment. We want direction, as much direction as possible from the subcommittee. This is a work in progress, and you'll see as we go that there's going to be more opportunity for this group to meet and for us to take your direction as we start to get our arms around what it is we're trying to do and what possible changes or solutions are out there for what we feel is the challenge in front of us. And then Matthew will do the wrap up at the end. He'll chime in from time to time with his wisdom, but as we wrap up, we'll clearly go through a schedule, next steps, and make sure we heard everything from you two and the public so that we can decide how to go from there. So on June 16th, I believe it was, a council meeting. There was a series of events that night that came together kind of coincidentally. At that meeting, we were approving our budget for fiscal year starting July 1st, and we also had the sheriff's contract that comes before the council every year, and it's renewed by the council. We're in the middle of a 3-year extension on the sheriff's contract, but each year the council has the opportunity to renew that contract, assuming that there might be some cost of living adjustments or other cost changes. So that was on the agenda. Nationally, there were protests going on at that time. It was not quite, it wasn't quite much after the George Floyd shooting. Maybe it was 3 weeks after, and that was going on. And then also we had a police shooting and the woman died, Sandra Harmon. That had also happened 5 weeks or so earlier, and there were questions being asked during public forum and at other points in the agenda. I think we had a study session about what happened there and what the process was for that officer-involved shooting to be investigated. So that was all happening on June 16th, as you might recall, and we as staff received 2 significant directions from the council. The first was to form this public safety subcommittee. And the second was to have a community workshop on policing in the city of Half Moon Bay. So I'll touch on the second task first and then get back to the public safety subcommittee, because of course we did create the subcommittee, and Councilmember Rarbeck, Councilmember Ruddick, you're it. And this is the second official meeting of that subcommittee. But on the second task, I want to touch on that because that's going on a parallel track. And I believe at some point the 2 tasks will merge together. They're obviously related. Councilmember Ruddick, it was your idea to form the subcommittee, and it was Councilmember Penrose's idea to have a more in-depth community dialogue where we could hear from the public about policing issues. And so I just wanted to give an update on that. Matthew's taking more of the lead on that task. And what we quickly found was having one community workshop was not going to be sufficient to really accomplish what Councilmember Penrose had in mind and what we felt as staff was the charge and purpose of that community workshop. 2 reasons for that. The first reason is the limitations of Zoom right now make it very hard to have community dialogue in a meaningful way. And so we recognize that either we were going to wait potentially a long time, or we were going to have to get creative in how we used Zoom to try to have what we want to be a very productive community workshop. So that was one reason. And then the second reason was just after talking to Councilmember Penrose and talking internally, we also realized that it seemed like it could be very unsatisfying to both the community and the council to have one workshop and expect that we would really realistically get our arms around what the challenge is. What are we trying to accomplish with a workshop, and how do we take the feedback from a community workshop and use it effectively to make positive change? And so that then led to having some focus groups. And so Matthew has set up 6 different focus groups, and those meetings are taking place as pre-meetings to a community workshop. I believe he's had 3 of those focus groups meeting, and Deborah Penrose is attending these meetings. And from that, he's going to strategize on then how to more effectively have a broader community workshop using Zoom. So Matthew can talk a little bit more about that. But I wanted to mention that because, like I said, the 2 tasks are clearly related and are going to merge. Because as we understand the assignment, we're studying all this, one, because it's the right thing to do. The sheriff contract is a very big part of our budget, and we should be looking at it periodically as we do. And the council should know as much about that contract as possible so that they can make informed policy choices about directing service level and how we manage to effectively have the best policing and public safety services in Half Moon Bay possible. And we can't do that without hearing from the public and the community. So that should be happening anytime. But as I mentioned, with the events that were occurring nationally, I believe the questions that were coming up for the community and the council were, well, is what is happening nationally, is that also happening in Half Moon Bay? Are the challenges that the nation's facing happening here? And so that's how the two relate. We plan to look at the sheriff's contract. The subcommittee was clear to take a deep dive, look at the statistics, look how much it costs, look at the service levels, look at overtime, and report back. The first task was fact-finding and research so that the subcommittee could start thinking about direction or changes that they wanted. But at the same time, we're going to be doing this community meeting, and we feel that the results of that will come back to the subcommittee as well at some point, so that you have all that information before we would then decide what, if anything, should be changed in what we do here in Half Moon Bay. So that's how the two relate. So you're going to hear from Corey, I think, first on more of the specifics of the sheriff's contract, how we got into it, how much it costs, nuts and bolts things. Eventually, this is going to be a white paper that her and Jonathan will finish. It'll be made available to the public. It's a work in progress now. So this first check-in with you is to kind of give you the outline of all the research that they've done to this point, get more direction from you and the public, and then finish the white paper so it can be presented to the whole council. The second part of that will then be Jonathan. His task, whereas Corey was to look specifically at the sheriff's contract, Jonathan's was more to look at what's going on nationally and what changes are being proposed out there that are relevant. What is going on in terms of a paradigm shift with regard to policing at the national level, and then at the state level, and then at the county level, and then what, if anything, and how does that apply to the services we receive in Half Moon Bay? And what changes should we be conscious of? What should we be watching for as we watch what goes on nationally? So as everyone knows, what I'm talking about, there were two very prominent, but there were more, but two, I will say, that kind of have bookended the most recent protests that we've seen, the resurgence of Black Lives Matter, or at least the resurgence of it in our collective consciousness. George Floyd was killed by police in Minneapolis on May 25th. And then more recently, Jacob Blake was shot and seriously injured by police in Wisconsin just on August 23rd. So I just cite these two events as kind of the bookends of other events and a conversation that has been happening nationally and protests that we've seen. But how it relates to Half Moon Bay, and again, going full circle back to the direction and what happened on June 16th, was we had an officer-involved shooting and a woman was killed in Half Moon Bay in very close to the same time period. It actually happened on May 5th, so about 2 weeks before George Floyd was killed. Sandra Harmon, and that investigation just recently concluded, and the DA, Steve Wagstaff, has committed to come to the next council meeting to make a presentation on his conclusions of that investigation and take all questions. So that's happening at the same time. And then, of course, 6 years ago, there was a killing here as well, Yanira Sereno, in, I think, June of 2014. And the questions that I feel we were getting from the public and the council were, is there a relationship here? Is what we're seeing nationally, and the fact that we've had these two killings in 6 years in Half Moon Bay, and we're in a small town, do we have the same challenges here that we're seeing nationally? And if we do, what should we do about it? So that's kind of the context. And I think, there's probably lots of questions that need to be asked. I don't know if we have all the answers today, but I don't think we should move really fast or be reactive. I'm looking at potentially a 10-month process. I think they'll show a schedule at the end of the presentation. But because our contract is kind of renewed each year, I think we probably have until next fiscal year to go through this process. We want to be as transparent as possible. I would see this subcommittee meeting again probably in November, say, and then maybe again in February. And if out of that there are any changes that are desired in the sheriff's contract, I think February, March is the right time for those to be communicated, because then we would want to communicate those to the county sheriff so that those changes could then be incorporated when we started the next fiscal year, next July 1st, 2021. And during that same time, of course, as I mentioned, there'll be the community workshop, and that will feed into this as well. So I don't think 10 months is too long at all. I really don't think we want to be reactive here. It's always very important to define the problem first before you jump to solutions. And again, I think it's really important for us to look at the conversation at the national level to really ask those questions about what we want here for policing. What are the problems here? Do they mimic what's happening nationally, or do we have different challenges here? What are the strengths of our contract with the sheriff? What are the weaknesses of our contract with the sheriff? Those kind of questions. And then what can we learn from this paradigm shift that we see happening as we decide what to do? So that's the context that I took from that June 16th meeting. That's what we've been working on. And with that, unless there's any questions or if Matthew has anything to add, I'll turn it over to Corey and Jonathan. Their presentation's about 15 minutes, plenty of time for you guys to ask questions, take public comment, and then bring it back for further direction.
I don't have anything to add at this time. I'll add anything at the wrap up.
And is it right, Corey, you're first and Jonathan second?
Yes.
All right.
It's a smooth transition. It'll be easy. All right. Thanks, Matthew. Next slide, please. So good evening, subcommittee members and community. Jonathan and I have been working on a white paper, and it's a little bit of background information on a very important community topic. Just give me 1 moment to move this. And it kind of acknowledges the current transition in our society today. Bob did a great job of sort of wrapping up our summary, so that was perfect. It does have pieces of information on the sheriff's contract, the history, the budget. We do explore other contracting cities. We explore some of the services that are provided, as well as the response from sheriffs and some of the current events. Next slide, please. So to start off with the history, due to some economic factors in 2011, after there was a request for proposal from a few different police groups, we selected the San Mateo County Sheriff. There have been 12 total amendments. 3 of the very important ones would be Amendment 1, where we talked about, we reconfigured the community service officer, the CSO position, from 2 part-time positions to 1 full-time position. Amendment 7, we revised the personnel by removing the lieutenant position and adding the captain position, which we have today. And then our 11th amendment, which was the extension of the contract by 3 years and correcting our service gap, as well as adding beaches and parks as a priority area for the summer months. So I wanted to also mention jurisdictional area. There's a little bit of confusion as to what our contract specifically covers. Our jurisdictional area is in the city of Half Moon Bay limits. So our contract only covers the city of Half Moon Bay. However, the sheriff does have jurisdiction over the entire coast side. So I believe from the Tom Lantos Tunnel to the Santa Cruz Mountains in the rough area. The sheriff does include the city of Half Moon Bay, but that is technically separate from the rest of the coast side. However, we're hoping through some of the findings and through maybe some improvements or some ideas, that could be something that would be affected over the whole coast side. However, we currently only can control within the city of Half Moon Bay. Next slide, please. So the cost for the 2011-2012, the first fiscal year, was $2,281,332. Immediately, that was over a $500,000 savings over having our own police department. Our current cost for 2020 to 2021 is $3,005,642, which is not a large amount of money to be paying for a police department or for having police and law enforcement services. Some of the other budgetary and financial items that have to do with our law enforcement is the COPS grant. It's a citizens option for public safety and that comes from federal funding, which would be the Supplemental Law Enforcement Services Fund. The COPS grant can be used for equipment, such as this beautiful signboards that we have 3 of now, or the Polaris that people might have seen on the beach for the police to patrol. It can be used for supplemental services, diversion and education programs, or overtime for some of the events that we have, or extra beach patrol that we require. It cannot be used for capital products or for capital projects. One of the other notes is overtime. So this will be an item that comes up a few times, but there are 7 main uses for overtime: sick and comp time, vacation, family medical leave assistance, disability, the gang task force, special details, and essential worker time off, as well as training. So those are the main uses for overtime. There is the JPA for some of these services, and the services we will talk about later. So the JPA is the Joint Power Agreement between the San Mateo County Police Department. So it's not just the San Mateo County Sheriff. So all of the police chiefs are part of this JPA, and they look at some of the services that we will talk about later. And if they don't offer them and they can't provide a body to offer them, they need to provide funding to assist San Mateo County in offering that service. So that would be an extra cost for some of these cities' police departments that we do not have to pay because we already work with the San Mateo County Sheriff. Next slide, please. So a comparison to other sheriff contract cities. There's 4 different municipalities that work with the San Mateo County Sheriff: Millbrae, Portola Valley, Woodside, and San Carlos. Millbrae initially joined in with San Mateo County Sheriff as a cost savings in 2012, I apologize. They have 11 amendments, very similar to ours, and they save approximately $1 million a year using the San Mateo County Sheriff. The next is Portola Valley Woodside. They've joined together to have a consolidated contract and have very small differences. I believe one is a motorcycle cop that Woodside has that Portola Valley doesn't utilize. And they do share a captain. They've been under the sheriff since they were incorporated in about 1964, but they've had an official contract with the sheriff since 1983. They just recently signed a contract in 2018 for a 5-year contract with the San Mateo County Sheriff. In San Carlos, they're very similar to Millbrae. They joined the San Mateo County Sheriff family in 2010 for a cost savings. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of services that are provided in working with the San Mateo County Sheriff. So one of the items is the Sheriff's Activity League, which guides youth of San Mateo County towards their full potential through impactful projects or programs and events, which foster relationships between deputies and their community. Some of the events that they have are movie nights, and I believe that our Sheriff's Activity League would meet almost every other week, or I would say weekly, I'm not 100% sure, on Wednesdays in our city. They have school resource officers, which are SROs. The school resource officer is a service that contract cities and unincorporated cities do receive from the San Mateo County Sheriff without any extra charge in the contract. Another service is the Community Alliance to Revitalize Our Neighborhood, the Karen Project, the Gang Task Force and Intelligence Unit, the Narcotics Task Force, the Vehicle Theft Task Force, and the Psychiatric Emergency Response Team, which is PERT. One of the important ideals for the law enforcement changes that people had requested was more mental illness or mental service providers. So one of the items is PERT that is provided by San Mateo County Sheriff. And PERT is the Psychiatric Emergency Response Team. It consists of 1 sheriff's detective and 1 licensed mental health clinician from Behavioral Health and Recovery Services. PERT reviews all sheriff's office cases involving possible mental illness and conducts follow-up investigation when necessary. It has a goal of connecting patients and their families with services and resources that can help manage acute crisis, prevent tragic outcomes, and reduce hospitalizations and incarcerations. And along with that, some of those are on the JPA that other cities need to either help pay for or provide an officer to help work with so that these services can be provided throughout San Mateo County. Next slide, please. And then Jonathan, I believe that'll be yours.
Thanks, Corey. Good afternoon, committee members and staff. So the murder of George Floyd spawned massive nationwide protests and civil unrest that prior police killings and shootings had not. There were a number of protests beginning in late May and particularly in early and mid-June, dozens in the Bay Area, including one in Half Moon Bay. Hundreds of residents from the coast side protested near Surfers Beach on June 5th for nearly an hour in response to the killing. And as of last month, millions of Americans participated in protests in more than 2,000 cities. And it also went internationally. It caused the National Guard mobilization in a number of states and the arrest and charge of a number of police officers, 4 officers involved in the Floyd killing. And George Floyd's death, while not the only one right now, has been one of the biggest in recent American history and has led to a number of protests nationwide and calls for police reform on the scale that hasn't been seen before. The Black Lives Matter movement was formed in 2013 and had great prominence beginning in 2014 after the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And until 2017, the Black Lives Matter movement actually had a negative net approval rating nationwide when polled. But since the George Floyd killing in May, the approval rating for Black Lives Matter movement has actually grown to more than positive 20%, although those numbers have gone down in the past couple of months. Next slide, please. In spite of because of the killing and a number of other killings, including Breonna Taylor and the shooting of Jacob Blake, a number of police reforms nationwide have been called upon to happen. They vary in degree of severity. A popular one that has come up has been a Civilian Police Oversight Committee. And police oversight committees have existed actually since the late 19th century, but became very popular during the late 20th century in response to a number of shootings, including the beating of Rodney King in Los Angeles. There are a number of different models to create a civilian police oversight committee, but the gist of it really is it's designed to impartially review police conduct and make recommendations for improved practices. And as of 2016, there were 144 civilian police oversight committees in the United States, including more than a dozen in California. However, there are no oversight committees in the country the size of Half Moon Bay. In fact, there are very few in cities with less than 100,000 people. The smallest one in California is in Davis, and Davis has about 70,000 people. Another proposed reform is called 8 Can't Wait. It comes from a police reform campaign called Campaign Zero that formed after the death of Michael Brown in 2014. And the idea there is that it has recommended 8 policies recommended to de-escalate police violence and to avoid unnecessary shootings of people. And they include here, as you can see, banning chokeholds, requiring de-escalation, requiring a warning before shooting, among a number of things. And as of June, San Mateo County has met or is in the process of meeting all 8 of the 8 Can't Waits reforms. And there's also been calls for what's called defund the police. Broadly, defund the police, the movement is about reallocating or redirecting funding away from the police department into other government agencies, such as mental health crisis units or social services. The term is very broad. In Camden, New Jersey, they actually dissolved their police department in, I believe, 2012 and completely reformed it. But it also can mean having different agencies do different things, such as in Berkeley, they've proposed having a new agency write traffic tickets for people, not the police. They would be unarmed. And in other cities, it's not about necessarily defunding police departments, but instead adding more resources to other agencies, such as social services. And this movement, again, has grown in the last few months. And although it peaked in nationwide recognition with the protests in June, it's still at higher levels than we've seen in a number of years, and calls on reform have still grown. Thanks, Matthew.
I guess a quick wrap up, if I can, is just to sort of say that this paper, in conjunction with the meetings that we're having, those focus community meetings, will all help with the education and the information for moving forward with the larger community meetings and the larger study sessions we'll have for the law enforcement information. Thank you.
And I think just for the committee members, I think one of the things we're hoping for is, as you've listened to and seen the report, the staff report, is to make sure that in our previous discussions with you individually, that the topics you're wondering about and thinking about and that you've heard from constituents, that those are being included in this discussion and in this research. And if there's anything we're missing today, we'd like to make sure we include that as we continue to do the research for the white paper study.
A couple of things, Matthew. I'm really interested in the results of these focus groups. I think that's a good place to start because without the confidence of the community, we're really up the creek. So I want to know what our community members, particularly our Latino and Black community members, think about what services they're getting, whether they feel intimidated or happy with crime prevention. So that's one area that I'm definitely interested in making sure we pursue in a realistic way.
And that's definitely when we finish the series of focus groups that we're doing. As Bob mentioned, we have 6 groups we've identified. We've met with 3 of them already. I think for several of them, there will be multiple meetings. But when we complete those meetings, we'll prepare a report that can go alongside this white paper, again, to inform this group and the larger council as we move forward.
Matthew, would you like to name the 6 groups that you've established?
Sure. So our Latino and immigrant population, I think, was the first one that we thought about, and we've already met with the Latino Advisory Council and other members of our Latino community. The homeless community. We've held one meeting with our service providers who work with the homeless community. We're currently in the process of scheduling a focus group with actual members of the homeless community so that they can talk about their own personal interactions and feelings on this issue and on this topic. The third group that we've met with is the nonprofits in our community, those that are serving our community who, you know, they serve the homeless, they serve the Latino community, they serve individuals' mental health issues. They really get to see a broader population. And then we plan to hold a series of youth-focused meetings, both with school administrators and parents, as well as the youth themselves. And we're working with the Youth Leadership Institute to plan and organize those meetings. We plan to meet with clergy members here on the coast to understand their interactions and their parishioners and members of their churches, what they've experienced. And then I think the biggest of all of these, which is kind of a combination of everything, is really looking at mental health as probably the number one topic to talk about here. And it cuts across all of the different groups, all the different interactions that we've heard about. And I think we'll be spending some time on that. And so once we've held enough of those meetings with those groups that we feel like we've gathered the right amount of feedback and input, again, we'll prepare those into a report that will inform you, the community, and the council at large in some of the decision-making going forward.
That's wonderful, Matthew. Thank you.
So I'm interested in exploring the recommendations of the Latino Advisory Council. I believe there are 3 or 4 recommendations, and I'd like us to vet those for their feasibility and whether, you know, the individual recommendations are something we can or should take on, or whether there are other groups in the community that could address those needs. And I'm sure the community conversations will turn up other needs, but I think I'd like to explore the advisory council's recommendations. I'd also like to review the 8 Can't Wait. And I know we had a presentation about that this summer, but I'd like some verification about what our sheriffs are actually doing. And I'd like to know how we might monitor whether those things are being done on a, you know, performance basis, you know, so that they're all great ideas, but are they actually being employed? Are there issues with their being employed? You know, how do we make them effective? I'd also like to know about potential alternative uses for the COPS funding. You mentioned supplemental services. What might those be? So as we talk to the community and start to understand needs more, we might be able to refine, you know, some alternatives for that funding. So I think that's one area where we have some flexibility because we have some funding, you know, to help, you know, change the mix. Those are 3 things that are important, you know, to me. But I agree with Harvey. I think hearing from the various groups is going to be important as well. We touched upon this during the budget discussion, but you know, we're very limited in police staffing. It's not like we have fat we can cut to save additional monies. In fact, after this past weekend, I'm hearing people clamoring for, you know, for more services, public safety services. So I think we want to look at that mix, whether it's a additional community service officer, or there's some other way to offload some of their work to have, you know, staff or contractor do ticketing and that sort of thing. I want to understand alternatives in the mix of police services and staff and outside contracting, so that we can get more coverage and do so more cost effectively. My perception is people think the sheriffs are doing, you know, a good job. That said, we know that the police have taken on way more responsibility than just law and order, right? They're doing social services. We've loaded everything up on the police and the schools. So how can we help them be more effective in their jobs by focusing their efforts, you know, that's part of their mission, and offloading that if possible, you know, to others. But I don't see how we're going to defund our police. I don't really like that phrase. It's just, how do we deliver it more effectively and address the issues of mental health and avoiding situations that might set us up for kinds of profiling, you know, that sort of thing. So this is an iterative process. Today's discussion is not the end all be all, but those are some of the things that I'm thinking about and that I think, you know, we want to address in the paper and then in the community meetings. So I'd love to hear from the public today. It looks like we have a good turnout.
It does look like we have 10 to 12 members of the public. So at whatever time you want to hear from them, we can go to that step.
Now.
Okay, Jessica, are you on the line?
I am.
Can we at this point switch to taking public comment?
Yeah, so if any of our attendees would like to provide comments to the subcommittee, please use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. And our first comment will be from Suzanne Swear. Suzanne, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to comment. I just really wanted to echo what Debbie Ruddock just said about the support within Half Moon Bay. I love the support that we get from the Sheriff's Department. I've always felt like they've been very responsive and that the services have been good. But I do, and it's because we're coming fresh off of a 3-day weekend, I do have the sense that we're always woefully short of appropriate resources for 3-day weekends, not just in terms of supporting beach traffic and so forth, but even just basic things like having somebody man the light at Highway 1 and Highway 92. It seems like traffic is always an issue during the summer. And I don't know how we get the appropriate resources. We know that this is going to happen to us. So how do we get ahead of this and make sure that we have the appropriate support? So that's something I'd love to see factored into all of this mix. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Stacy McCarthy. Stacy, go ahead.
Hi, everyone, council members and city staff and Saul. Thank you for creating this forum. I'm impressed with the work that's been done so far. Really glad to hear Corey and Jonathan's voices in this. And Matthew, thank you. I appreciate this is a special time that we are in as a nation. And I'm proud to be in a city that's addressing what's right in front of us and taking the time to look at law enforcement in our community. I am part of a group called Coastside Families Taking Action. We're over 100 families here. And in the Justice Subcommittee, we're landing right now on 3 things that we really care about. And we'd like to see if they can be added into the mix. Some have been discussed so far. Jonathan, you're pointing to a lot of possible solutions. And I appreciate that the council will be taking time to hear about different options. But the 3 things that we see as really important, the first is focusing on de-escalation. De-escalation being a primary approach from the sheriff's office in every interaction that they have, whether it be responding to a phone call from a citizen or a traffic stop, whatever it might be. When we hold that as our primary purpose in how we interact with law enforcement, I think that the interactions shift dramatically. And there's some national research and activities that are happening, for instance, in Fort Lauderdale, where they've shifted this quite dramatically. And I'm happy to connect with Jonathan and share with him the resources that I've read in this regard. So that's the first one. The second is around acknowledging that mental health has really been, when we have mental health concerns in our community and that interacts with law enforcement, it can be difficult to navigate those interactions. And I think for us to take a serious look at that as a community and how can we resource that differently is extremely important. There have been 6 killings in San Mateo County in the last 6 years of folks with mental illness in their interactions with different policing entities. And I'm sure that we can do better. I was disappointed that we didn't hear anything in the sheriff's report in the last city council meeting, kind of addressing the investigation there. As I understand it from Bob's summary, it sounds like it's complete, and we'll hear from the DA in the next meeting. I look forward to that. And the last thing that we're very interested in is this idea of transparency and really having visibility to our interactions and how our neighbors, people of color in our community, how they interact. From the very beginning of a phone call being placed for a concern, to the interaction that they have with their sheriff's department, all the way through the system, right? The court system, the prison system. I would really like to see us have visibility, and maybe that's through communities of practice. I'm not sure. But that's the third leg, I think, of this stool, is just to help us have visibility. In Saul's report in our last meeting, we heard the statistics for the types of crime that we see in our community. I really think we need to layer into that a view into our representative people of color in that regard. So I'll stop here. Those are the three things that we're hoping that can make their way through the recommendation process and your consideration. And we'd like to stay involved as best we can. So thank you.
Thanks, Stacy. Next, we have Bill Balson. Bill, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Bill Balson. I'm a resident of Ocean Colony. There's an old adage. It says, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. As Debbie has alluded to, the sheriff has wide support in Half Moon Bay. I'd personally like to thank you, Sheriff, for Captain Lopez, for the work you and your guys do. Very much appreciated. One of the things that I was absolutely stunned that I haven't heard a word from anybody on the city council or on the city staff is about the training that these guys go through. The police officer standard and training post is written into the ordinance that the city council passed, that's our standard for quality. And I'll tell you what, it's a damn fine program. In fact, the latest document they have exactly is on the issue of de-escalation that one of the previous speakers had. An important issue. It's been an important issue for police training for almost 200 years in the United States. That's a long time, a long track record. And it's a bit stunning that the staff summary of their beginning of analysis didn't even touch on this important topic. I submitted a page or so of written comments, but candidly, all I did was go look at their website. They spend years being trained in this, and it deals with almost all of the hot button issues that Jonathan covered in terms of 8 can't wait. All of those issues are in there, except the ones that shouldn't be in there. And you ought to go over those very carefully. I think it's important to periodically review all of the city services. So that's a great thing, but it ought to be data focused. There are certain subjective aspects that ought to be the subject of focus groups, and those focus groups ought to include the whole community, everybody in the community, not just 6 groups that you guys picked. Everybody. If you need to have a professionally designed survey and go out to the whole community, that may be the best way during COVID-19 times to get some feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Next, we have Matt Melt. Matt, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Matt Claudius. I'm a local business owner in Half Moon Bay. My question is for Mr. Lopez. In spite of this weekend and more weekends to come and weekends of the past, do you think that the Sheriff's Department is adequately staffed to actually close the beaches in the future if it were called upon, or if that is overwhelming to the staff, if there weren't the fires that are currently taking a lot of the staff away?
We're going to engage in Q&A. Or Bob, do you want to?
Yeah, members of the committee, unless there's any more public comment, I think there was 2 or 3 questions in there that we can answer all of them if that's your desire at this point. And maybe I go first and I can answer Susan's question about overtime and having additional staffing on busy weekends. And then I'll turn it over to Saul and he can go through their training programs, the point that Mr. Balson raised, and then also answer that question at the end. Do they have enough resources to actively manage a beach closure? So we'll hit all 3 of those. Those are the 3 questions I heard, and then turn it back to you.
Are there no other public speakers?
Doesn't look like it at this time.
Okay, I don't have any other hands raised, so I think that concludes public comments.
So on the first speaker, Suzanne's questions or comments, first I'll just mention, and it wasn't shown in the PowerPoint, but it will absolutely be included in the white paper, and it is of course summarized in our contract, is just the cost and the service level that we currently get for personnel. So it comes, essentially, it's about 11 people total. It includes half of Saul's time. Half of his time is the city, half of the time is unincorporated. It includes percentages of sergeants and the supervisors, and then 8 deputies. And if you do the math, that translates basically to having 2 deputies on 24/7 with some additional overlap during like shift change. So if you take 8 deputies, 40 hours a week, and do the math, that's what we essentially get. And then there's a little more in there. Then there's an overtime allotment. And as Corey mentioned, the main reasons that overtime is used, primarily when officers are off for different reasons, on vacation, on disability, we then have to back them up. We would never go vacant. So if an officer is off, Saul would have someone else come in. So we always have the 2 on, and they would fill in and do overtime. But then in addition to that, as was mentioned by Susan, Sal is able to ramp up for festivals, the Pumpkin Festival, busy weekends, etc. And for example, at this past weekend, instead of having our normal 2 deputies, he had 2 additional ones. So we had 4 deputies, and those are then paid overtime. So to her question, yeah, that can be done. And Sal can speak more to what he thinks the right level is, depending on whether it's a festival, the Pumpkin Festival, a busy summer weekend. Is 4 enough? Should we have 6? I mean, at what point are you just, kind of throwing money at it? And that's something that, is a decision that's made between staff and Saul on what the right level is. But we have the ability, if he can get the resources, he does have to find officers who serve other jurisdictions or other parts of the county to come in and do that overtime and want to work on a weekend. So assuming he can do that, we do have the ability to go from 2 to 4 to 6 on a weekend. And that would include having someone, she mentioned, what about stationing someone at a signal? This is something we have kind of gone back and forth on several times internally. It has been done during the Pumpkin Festival and quite effectively at the last Pumpkin Festival for a variety of reasons that Sal and I can go into why it did work. We're not clear it would work on a normal summer weekend when the majority of people are heading easterly on Highway 92, and once it's gridlock, it's gridlock. The road will only take so many cars so fast. That said, we have talked about trying it out as a pilot, and it is an example of where we would look at other options separate from the sheriff's contract. So we would work in close coordination with Saul, but we would probably hire a retired deputy, or we would hire a contract service who then would coordinate with Sal. That would be a more effective use than having a deputy, one of Sal's deputy out there doing traffic control, basically helping visitors get home faster is what you're doing. And so we have talked about that and something we can do. So those are my answers to Susan's questions. I'll turn it over to Sal to address all the training that they do go through. I think that is important, and that was a great question. And then also the last question about having the resources to do beach closures effectively. Go ahead, Sal.
First and foremost, thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to listen to all the commentary and provide some answers to the best of my ability. So for training, there are hundreds of hours that we put our deputies through, and even myself go through, initially with the police academy, which is approximately 1,000 hours now, so a little bit over 6 months or close to 7. Then they have field training program, which is usually 3 to 4 months, where they have a senior deputy that goes to specific training to train new deputies in all law enforcement practices and policies that we have here in the sheriff's office. And then throughout the years and during their career, they receive mandated training from POST, Peace Officers Standards and Training. And that is out of the governor's office in Sacramento. So we are ahead of the curve in the nation. The other state that has a similar POST program would be Colorado. So people that are certified under POST here in California can essentially go anywhere in the country and easily get a job in law enforcement because we're so far advanced in training, and the expectation to be at that level is higher than any other part. In regards to de-escalation, that is our primary focus in the sheriff's office now, and it has been for many years. We did, as I mentioned in my annual report out at last council meeting in regards to our crisis intervention training, I believe we are at or close to 100% of our deputies that have received a 40-hour course in de-escalation. So it doesn't matter where they're working, the courts, corrections, in the jails, or even in patrol. Most people have received this training because, as Bob mentioned, when I do staff these extra positions, they're already assigned to these divisions that I just mentioned. So we expect everybody to not only have that training, but as the council knows and the general public, we have had our body-worn cameras, which brings another form of transparency to our interactions with the public since May of last year. I think we're close to a year now. Not only do the deputies wear body-worn cameras, but our patrol vehicles have a camera facing forward and also within the compartment of the back seat. So after an individual is arrested, they're closely being monitored as well for their well-being, as during the transport to the jail or to a detox facility, depending on what the arrest is. I can bring further information in regards to our training, but it is a long list of perishable skills that are given to our deputies throughout the year. I mean, they're mandated by POST, and POST conducts audits of our office and our individual members, I believe once a year or once every 2 years. And then to the point of the gentleman that asked about beach closures, Half Moon Bay is in a very unique situation. We've all talked about it. We follow the recommendations of city council and of the city manager based on city beach closures. Once those take effect, we will enforce whatever local ordinance we have available to us in order to prevent people from coming out to the beaches. As we talked about in many meetings, our beaches are surrounded by state parks, and we have to work in concert with state parks, as we all know. And sometimes the state of California leaves the beaches open, as they did this past weekend and other weekends where we've closed them. And so that makes it a difficult issue for all of us. I know the city staff and public works and the city manager's office, we all work together in order to prevent people to come out. Lastly, on staffing, as Bob mentioned, I can put out overtime and staff these positions. And ideally, I would love to double or triple up on the 2 regular deputies I have assigned for every 12-hour shift. The reality is that those folks do need time off, and they will come out depending on the detail. And, it just varies. For 3-day weekends, as I think one of the residents mentioned, we always try to prepare and staff up for those weekends. As we did this past weekend, we had people on bicycle patrols on the coastal trail. I brought in extra community service officers, and I will report out on the September 15th City Council meeting on the results of Labor Day weekend. But we issued several hundred parking citations, not only in Half Moon Bay, but along the entire coastline from Montera down to Pescadero and even farther south from there. So this weekend was bad all the way throughout the coast, and we're still managing security and traffic posts down in the South Coast area where the fire is still active and CAL FIRE is still there. So we still have to maintain that security issue, which will be lifted sooner than later. But hopefully that gave some perspective of where we come from. But again, transparency is key for us, and so is crisis intervention training. I mean, the one thing that I mentioned in our last council meeting, we want to diffuse a situation and not escalate it. And I know that's the mission of the sheriff, and that's also my mission with my deputies out here.
Members of the committee, I do see a couple more hands raised. So if you would like to take the public comment, I can certainly have Jessica do that.
Please.
Head nods, yes.
Okay, so we have Eric Hollister. Eric, go ahead.
Hi, folks. I appreciate you taking the phone call and my questions. Two quick questions for Saul. That's actually the first time I've called you Saul Lopez. I usually call you Saul Lopez, so I apologize for that. Number one question, these parking tickets that get issued within the city limits of Half Moon Bay, how much of those funds go back to the city?
So thank you, Eric. That question was asked of me, and I know that the city attorney was going to look into the bail schedule and the reimbursement after they were issued. We are not involved in that process. We basically file those parking citations to traffic court, and then they have a reimbursement schedule to each individual city. So I'm not sure how that's structured.
Okay. Well, I definitely want to, before I forget, thank you for posting people up, motors up at Kelly and Alsace Lorraine. I can't tell you how many times we love hearing that siren go off. And my daughter does say money in the bank, but we do appreciate you just warning those people in the very least, because we've had near collisions, we've had near people getting hit. So anyways, I appreciate that. The last question I have for you is, when I was in the NET program, there was a gentleman named Chad Woodburn that was there, and he was the Coastside Emergency Services Coordinator, I think. Fantastic individual. It seems like in a time of COVID, that would have been the person that would have been the person for us to go to without having to go to the sheriff's department, go to you, go to Carlos or anybody else. What happened to that gentleman?
So he transferred back to Redwood City, and quite honestly, I haven't kept track of his career path and where he's at now. Okay. But I am aware that Corey Stalker is the emergency services coordinator for the city of Half Moon Bay, and she works directly with our personnel at the EOC in Redwood City in regards to COVID and other emergency issues. So I'll defer to her and Bob.
Okay, Corey, I do see you there, and I saw the emergency part. So I was wondering if you were his replacement. I really appreciate all the effort you guys did this weekend. It did seem like Mr. Turner and I put out a lot of effort to get people to stay home. Media did a great job. I did see a little bit more police presence. I did hear more sirens going off for speeding tickets and the like. I just hope that the emergency services were able to get to their locations in the same expedient amount of time that they usually do.
And members of the committee, to Mr. Hollister's first question. So this is something we're digging into. This was part of our original assignment and will be included in the final paper that is presented to your committee, this question about ticket revenue. The contract does have a section devoted to revenue that comes back to the city in terms of tickets, fines, forfeitures, those kind of things. And we are working now to get our hands around that revenue. We know how much we get each month. We do get a check from the county each month, but we are working with the county to dive deeper and try to figure it out on a per ticket basis and basically track the dollar of how much comes back to the city and how much of that ticket goes to other agencies. So that is work that we're doing. We had hoped to have that ready for this meeting, but it's just not ready yet. So that'll be included, and a very good question, and one that other people have asked as well.
Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate that, because I can guarantee you that a lot of citizens are going to be real happy with police presence if those funds are coming right back into our pockets. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time, committee.
Some of it does, but a lot of it doesn't. Yes.
Sure. Yeah, I can understand. Be nice. Thank you so much for your time.
Next, we have Brent Turner. Brent, go ahead.
Hello, council members and staff and sheriff. My name is Brent Turner. I just wanted to put a comment on the record that my feeling for the public sentiment is that, of course, we appreciate the task at hand and the busyness of the sheriff's department, but we also want to request that everybody involved in this meeting takes time to consider escalating this issue of an emergency setting on the co-side when we have this confluence of factors, a 3-day weekend, a COVID pandemic. I know that not everybody feels that the pandemic should cause the alarm that many members of the public believe that it should cause. But just on behalf of the public, if we could get any escalation, not just in the moment when we're going right into the weekend, but even right now, just to start contacting the governor again. We've, as the public, have been in touch with the lieutenant governor and some local officials, just trying to get relief so that people are paying attention to Half Moon Bay and the coast-side in general, and the plight that we're suffering with that Lake Tahoe effect of major influx of people that possibly carry the germ with them, and then infect our frontline service workers who are predominantly communities of color. So we want to be sensitive to all the issues occurring here. And again, the public does thank everybody involved for, trying to get their arms around this. We're just outmatched by the pandemic, I think. And if we could get some relief from other government officials in the county and at the state level, that would be wonderful. Thanks for your time.
That is all the public speakers.
I heard a couple of things that are related in my mind. One is de-escalation, and the other is responding to mental health crises. I wish there was some magic so that when somebody reported a problem that was clearly a mental health issue, it could be responded to by people who are not armed, but are expert in dealing with mental health issues. Frankly, I don't know how to do it. If I did, I would tell you. But that is my fervent wish that really would make a difference in our community if we could have mental health response. Salem, Oregon has such a response. It's a big deal. It takes a lot of people. They have their own vehicles. I don't think Half Moon Bay or even the 5 cities that contract with the sheriff's office have the capability of doing it. But if some creative people could figure out a way, I think that would be a real positive step to helping the community feel better about law enforcement, because armed police officers are not the best way to respond to mental health crises. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to just summarize what I'm hearing, but what I'm concerned about. So what precipitated this whole discussion was problems with the use of force and problems with the use of force against people of color and people with mental illness. So I want to make sure that when we come out of this, we're addressing the use of force issues to the extent that we can, and then the proper deployment of police in the area of social services and mental health. Properly focused police using de-escalation and other policies to guide the use of force, and then proper address of our social areas. So I don't, the beaches are important and, having, police presence there, but the motivation for this was the use of force issues and improper use of force against people of color. I don't want us to lose that in the discussion. So, our police, our sheriffs are doing, a great job in the things that we have them doing. But, 2 instances of people being mentally ill, people being shot and killed is too many. So I want us to keep focus on those issues. The issues of the beaches, we're dealing with that separately. I know there's a nexus here, but I want us to stay focused on these issues, and hopefully the community conversation will stay focused as well. I'd like to just, ask Harvey what he thought about Bill Balson's recommendation for, a more detailed survey work. Certainly, I think our communications department is capable of doing a lot of outreach. I don't know if we need to hire a professional survey agency, but to the extent that we can involve more and more folks in the discussion, I think it's a good idea. I just want to do that, in a manner that doesn't waste resources or take us away from dealing with, other issues. So I'd like to, just come back to that one idea to see what my fellow council member thinks, or whether staff has a response to that.
I really like what's been done so far, and I look forward to hearing what the results of the focus groups has been. So I think that's the right direction.
And I'll just comment on both of those in response to Mr. Balson's comments. I agree that we have to hear from the entire community. And so hopefully as we go through this process, people will see those opportunities. I think what led us to these smaller focus groups was, as Bob mentioned at the beginning, the constraints we're under right now. Typically, we'd have a great ability to meet people face to face, coordinate lots of smaller groups and large meetings, and we just looking at hopefully an end to this at some point where we can have those types of meetings. How could we use the time right now the most effectively? And so we've really honed in on some specific groups that we know have previously expressed concerns about law enforcement. And as we gather that feedback, hopefully that informs, as Mr. Balson describes it, a greater discussion with the entire community. So when maybe right now I'll provide it. I was going to provide it as part of the wrap up, but we hope to conclude these focus groups before the holidays, so that during that time period when people are focused on other things, we can compile that information, prepare a report for you and for the greater council. And then as we get into 2021, start holding those larger meetings. And hopefully we've reached a point with COVID that we can actually do some of those face-to-face. And I suspect we'll probably bring in like a PCRC to facilitate some of those meetings, because in order for a big group meeting to be effective, it can't just be, everybody sitting while each person gets up and shares their perspective. That goes on forever. So we have to be able to facilitate some smaller, more diverse groups that have all these different voices. It worked really well for our Home for All efforts around housing, affordable housing. And I think this is another environment where we can do that. And as you've both mentioned, that will help kind of identify what issues we have and where we need to focus our energies in changing things, in reallocating resources, and really looking at law enforcement here in the future.
I do think we might just, in our communications, let the public know that we're open to hearing from them on the issue, even if we didn't do, a formal survey. I do have one question for Saul. So you mentioned that there's 40 hours of training for new recruits. What is done after that to sort of reinforce? Are there refreshers? Are there one-on-ones with your supervisor? What sort of follow-up is done on a regular basis to sort of reinforce, the de-escalation, and other sorts of messages like that, so that it's not just once and done and, forgotten. So as a state employee, for instance, I have to do defensive driver training every 2 years. I have to have, harassment training and all that sort of thing. So what's done for the police to reinforce, these messages?
Yes, so the 40-hour training is just one small piece of the overall training of perishable skills that I mentioned that deputies go throughout their career. So I don't have a breakdown, but I can assure you that through the 1,000-hour academy that they have to go through initially, even prior to that, they have to go through psychological exams, sit down with the psychiatrist before they get hired, even through our background process. So I will have a better layout of the entire process from the moment an applicant submits that application to our office and what they go through until they are on their own. And afterwards, we have a training division that accounts for every single hour of training. If it has to do with de-escalation, use of force, and it's continuing even through our policy program. It's called Lexipol, and I think I mentioned it during the 8 Can't Wait presentation, where we get daily training bulletins, and a lot of those are give you a storyline, you read it, and choices of how you would best interact with that person. And a lot of those are for a mental health crisis. So to answer your question, yes, we go through reoccurring training to make sure they're refreshers and they don't lose that perishable skill, just like when we go to driver training or firearms training or tactical training. I mean, it's all consistent because ultimately it's all governed under the post standard and the certification of our deputies in our office that's audited. So I will be more than happy to provide that matrix per se that actually lays out from the moment that person puts in an application and how consistent. And it's going to be an average person because a lot of people or a lot of deputies find a different career track. It can be community policing, investigations. So some people will get far advanced training, but in relation to de-escalation and use of force, everybody receives the same.
And we can make that matrix an attachment to the final paper that is produced.
I just need it. I just need to have it vetted internally and make sure it's for public consumption, and absolutely. Yep.
Okay. I do see 2 hands raised, members of the committee. If it's 2 people who have spoke previously, but our approach here was to have a little less formality than we do at the council meetings. So you're certainly your prerogative to allow. Oh, now we have 3 speakers to speak. 4.
It's fine with me.
Matt, go ahead.
Hi, again, I'm Matt Claudius. I'm a owner of a Half Moon Bay business. My question is, do you think, this is just a question, that the paramedics could be trained better for response to mental illness cases? They're trained to save lives. They're trained to go to medical facilities. And in mental facilities, the guards don't have weaponry for many reasons. And maybe the use of the police, policing that the sheriffs have to do in a mental disturbance type case would be more to try to keep public safety and allow paramedics to come in and to help that person. Extra training on the paramedics and medical people that work in those departments could probably be fairly easily trained to take over a lot of those situations and actually be able to perform the help that they need and to transport them to the facility they need to go. That's my question, and thank you for taking my comment.
I can go ahead and answer that if the subcommittee doesn't mind. So first and foremost, any paramedic, if they're attached to CAL FIRE or any fire department or AMR, they do not enter a scene until we secure it. So they will not go into any emergency call until law enforcement has secured it, made it safe, and then they respond to treat the patient for whatever medical need. the majority, I would say close to 100% of the calls that AMR paramedics are involved in when it comes to a mental health crisis, it is mainly just to transport those individuals back to the psychiatric evaluation center in San Mateo. And AMR has a specific unit called the Smart Wagon, which we normally utilize, and they come out and do complete transports. Either when it's people that are unrestrained or have to be restrained because they are extremely violent or they're not following directions. So, and the other aspect of it is the sheriff's office does not oversee any paramedic group. AMR is a contract company with the county of San Mateo. So that would have to be pursued through either the county or through AMR specifically. And obviously, CAL FIRE, it's its own entity, so we do not oversee any of their policies or any actions that they take other than work with them in different circumstances. Hopefully that answered the question.
Next, we have Bill Balson. Bill, go ahead. Bill?
Yeah, I just had to unmute, sorry. So back to the survey issue for just a moment. In Ocean Colony, we have a number of hot button issues that have opinions across a wide spectrum, and then we have a large middle in the distribution that rarely speak up. We have the two ends of the distribution. And that's one of the challenges I think you have with focus groups. None of our issues are anywhere near as important as policing and getting policing right. I've worked with a couple of our committees and surveys, and we use SurveyMonkey, and it works out really well for us. We use it fairly judiciously. The surveys have to be kept fairly short, 10, 12, maybe 15 questions, and hit on just the key issues, but cover importantly the whole spectrum of possible opinions from one end of the spectrum to the other without shying away from politically sensitive issues. And as long as you take them with a grain of salt, it works out really well to get a sampling of the whole distribution. We've actually ended up getting 20, 30, 40% of our residents, depending on the survey, to participate, which those of you who are familiar with surveys know that's a pretty high percentage. My guess is for the whole of the citizenry, for Half Moon Bay, if you got 5 to 10%, you'd probably be lucky. I have done professional survey design, but I don't hold my shingle out to sell services in that, so I'm not looking for a job, and I don't offer myself out as a professional in that area. But I'm happy to work with the committee and show you what kinds of surveys you might want to look at.
And I will just add here on that to Matthew's initial answer on this. So again, Councilmember Penrose is running point on this effort. And this was one of our initial ideas. So when we sat down with Councilmember Penrose, I think for our first meeting with her to just brainstorm how we would go about having this community meeting and what we would try to accomplish and how we would make it work on Zoom, it was one of our ideas, was to do a survey. And we did reject it, not for bad reasons. It's more as Matthew described, but we'll circle back around with her. We were certainly not against it at all. We're still not. And it was one of our ideas for the same reasons that the speaker just mentioned. So we'll circle back around with Councilmember Penrose and see if this potentially still fits in with what we're trying to accomplish there.
And actually, sorry, not to contradict, but just to clarify, what we decided with that survey was to wait until we had moved a little farther into this process. As we started to design the survey, it was we didn't really feel like we had even honed in on what issues to survey about. So I think it's more of a delay than an outright cancellation of the concept.
Thank you for that, Matthew. Feel free to contradict me anytime when I get it wrong.
We have Michael Stogner. Michael? Michael?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you very much for taking the time to take on a very serious topic, and excessive force. Debbie is exactly one of the main things you all are dealing with. I did want to just hit on a couple things. On, I think it's Noah, was it? I can't quite see everybody's name right now. Jonathan, I'm sorry. On the 8 can't wait, I would just suggest that on the Sandra Lee Harmon homicide, 2 of the 6 categories were not met by the San Mateo County Sheriff's Department. So your statement that, you know, so far they're really up to speed, I would suggest they are not. Also, with respect to Yanira Serena Garcia, I was one of the few people who actually went to the DA's office 2 different times and spent over 7 hours reviewing all the case records. And my assessment was that the Sheriff's Department went to her location with no plan whatsoever, almost a very similar result of what we had with Sandra's case, where we had a deputy, a young man, a year and a half on duty. And I don't know if any of you know it or not, but both the sheriff, the district attorney, and county council have all said that he did not have his body camera on. And Captain Sal Lopez just told us what great training they've had. And I would just have to ask, or you should be asking, is do they train their sheriff deputies to turn on their body cameras? Because he happens to be the only deputy that was there communicating with her, supposedly, and he's the one that shot 11 bullets at her. 5 of them while she was unarmed with her hands above her head. And so, again, I don't expect people to watch the video of a person being killed. I have watched it many times. And Shenandoah Kobe, also Millbrae, same thing, no plan on how to pull over a civilian who committed no crime, just walking down the street. So you actually have, there are 6 homicides, and that's certainly what Sandra Harmon's case is. I now have the coroner's report. It states it's a homicide, and they've stated it since June, I think June 12th. So one of the things I think would be helpful as you as a city is that you could just ask your sheriff's department, in the event that somebody does unfortunately get killed, that the sheriff release all the videos within 24 hours or 48 hours so that nobody has to question what happened. The idea that you have and by the way, I don't know that Sheriff Deputy Dominguez has ever said he did not have his camera on. And that is why I'm asking for your help to get all of the documents that Steve Wagstaff has on the internet so that I don't have to drive up from Monterey to spend 4 hours on the freeway, to spend 6 hours in his office to actually see what really did happen that day. So again, thank you for what you're doing. You're doing some great work, but please pay attention to whether they're trained, and then if they're not doing what they were trained to, I would recommend that you ask Sal to never let that deputy on your streets again, if he in fact turned off his body camera. Thank you so much, and keep up the great work.
We have Stacy McCarthy.
Hi, thank you for the very meaningful conversation, and Councilman Rodak for directing it to the use of force. I understand that de-escalation training does happen. It happens across all police departments, sheriff's departments, is my understanding. I think if we look at the ratio of time that our deputies and team spend in de-escalation compared to weapon training and the other kinds of things, I think that would be a really helpful thing for us to look at. And I think it's less about training, which is always in an artificial environment, right? And it's more about the culture that we can help create within our community in concert with our sheriff's department around how we value de-escalation, how we actually see it and how we interact with them as a community so that it becomes the norm. I think it's difficult for it to become the norm regardless of the number of hours of training. And I've spoken to folks in other police departments who've said, yes, it's 40 hours, but it's 40 hours over a number of years. And it's kind of 2 hours each year. And maybe that's different for our sheriffs, and I'd welcome information around that. I think to complement that, if we're able to have the level of visibility, we may be in a position to celebrate our sheriff's department. They may be doing excellent work in this regard, and nothing would make me happier than to have the information to see that's the case. When body cameras are turned off, they should be always on. As far as I've learned, when they're turned off, it causes questions that I think would be unnecessary, as the last speaker spoke about, if that information could be made available. So we will be the first to celebrate the high bar that our sheriff's department can set in this regard, in this time in our nation. So I'd like to see nothing more. Thank you very much.
I can just clarify one thing. Thank you, Mrs. McCarthy. In regards to our 40 hours of crisis intervention training, that's done in one session. So that is above and beyond what we give our deputies throughout their career, through the year, even after the police academy. That is a specific training that we send our deputies to, where they learn how to do de-escalation. And that is consistently trained upon even inside of our jails. Most of our deputies go through our corrections division before they come out to patrol. So they are constantly de-escalating incidents within the jail and dealing with inmates who are either serving their sentence or waiting for their trial to begin. So as some of you may know or not know, there is always issues going on within corrections. So a lot of the experience that deputies, even our correctional officers, receive is de-escalation within those facilities, because you are in a controlled environment. But again, sometimes tensions can be a little high within the inmate population. So we have that experience where most police departments do not. So not only do we have the interactions with the public, but we also have it with individuals who are within our corrections division.
So members of the committee, at this point, we can wrap up. I see that Ms. McCarthy did raise her hand again. Again, if you want to have a back and forth with her on this subject, it is an important one. We can do that. I see the thumbs up from Councilmember Reddick, and then we can talk about next steps. It looks like you've been given, Jonathan, she has ability to speak.
Yes, Casey, go ahead.
Thanks again, and thank you, Captain Lopez. I appreciate that. I think that having our sheriffs start in our prison system may actually put them in a harsher environment to practice de-escalation than they would potentially be on the streets. And it would feel differently if their experience started somewhere else. And so I just want to offer that as an insight. I think this is a hard shift for organizations to make, and I want to commend you for all that you're doing in that regard. But when you're in an incarcerated population, it's very different than applying those skills in in a community spirit. So no criticism here, just an acknowledgement of the funnel of training as it happens. And I want to just say, I think there's a lot we could do as a culture to recognize and reward when there are successful de-escalation events that happen. Right? We should, if we had visibility to those things, then we could be honoring the good work that your team is doing. So thank you. It's a cultural thing, I think. Thanks. I'll stop here.
I'd just like to thank Saul for being here today. And also thanks to Corey and Jonathan for the work that they're doing. I know it's just the beginning. Really appreciate it. And Bob and Matt, thanks for all you're doing on the issue. And Bob, do you need specific direction today?
We do have one more hand raised. It's Matt Claudius, if you want to take one final comment from him.
Okay.
Matt, go ahead.
Again, I reiterate, has the city looked into the paramedics being more the first responders in a mental illness crisis or a potential mental illness crisis? Or could it be set up where when a 911 call is put in for a mental illness type crisis or something that looks of the sort, that there could be some kind of key signal word that's used that brings paramedics onto the scene, possibly first, to de-escalate in a potentially positive manner, as opposed to what we consider to be safety, but to a mental ill person may conceive of being a potential danger, like a police officer or a sheriff. Has the city ever considered anything like that, and talking to the hospitals or any of the local or state ambulance services that could possibly provide that first responder type of service, like a fireman would to a fire, as opposed to a police officer just keeping someone away from a fire? I end my comment. Thank you very much for taking comments and your time today. Thank you.
Matt, we've not looked at that specifically, but one of the things we're going to be looking at, a couple of us have found out about it through reading various articles. There is a group in Eugene, Oregon that sort of functions like paramedics, right? So when there's a mental health episode, they get in a vehicle and they go to your house, or they go to University of Oregon campus. And that's been in place for, I think, 30 or 40 years and has evolved over time. So that kind of is sort of the model that you're discussing, I think. And I think staff has said they would get together some information about that. Doubtful that it's something the city could afford to fully fund, but certainly, worth looking at, and we're checking it out.
We do have an additional hand. Michael Stogner, go ahead.
Can you hear me right now?
Yes.
Okay. I'll be real quick. On the Yanira Serena Garcia call, for those who might not remember it, and I think many of you might not even been working for Half Moon Bay at the time, the call was by her brother, Tony. It was a 911 call, and he specifically talked about what Matt was just recommending and Debbie's talking about. The fact that he stated that it was a non-emergency medical call only. It was a non-emergency, and he strictly wanted an ambulance to come out to help his sister take her new medications. And again, San Mateo County Sheriff's Department somehow, well, because of the policy, and Captain Sal brings up an excellent point. Maybe look at whatever the policy is between those agencies and start to see if you can set up a new policy. And I'm sure there are other cities that would love to join you to create what you're talking about. Because that is one case right there in your own town where the call, where there was no reason for a sheriff deputy to show up at that house at all. And he got out of his car, he ran up to the house, he startled Yanira, and she was shot dead within 20 seconds of him getting out of his patrol car. So best of luck to you. I think you're on the right track. Thank you for your time.
So Bob, you had asked me to wrap things up, and it sounds like that's where we're at. So as mentioned before, there is a timeline associated with this. It's not a short timeline. We think this is an incredibly important issue, and it needs to be looked at properly and really in an effective way. You know, I think going back to the purpose of all this, we're keeping a very open mind here. I think our job is to provide many avenues for research, for input, for discussion, to identify what issues, if there are issues, that need to be addressed, and then understand how to address them moving forward. And I think to some of the callers' points, I think we're gonna find areas that we can improve, and we're also gonna have a chance to highlight some of the successes that we most certainly have had here in our community with law enforcement. And hopefully that allows the community to have the same kind of open mind that we're trying to have here. And so a couple of things, again, that are happening. We will continue to do the focus groups and collect community input. And you know, I think there's been a renewed desire to do a larger survey, which is on the list. And maybe we've reached a point where we're informed enough to put that together. And provide other ways for people to provide input. And ideally, all of that community input is gathered into a report that is available around the same time that this white paper is completed with the efforts of Corey and Jonathan. And I think they've heard some things that they can continue to refine and focus on as they finalize this paper. And I think for all of this, the goal is to really have a lot of the research in the background done before the holidays, so that when we come back in the new year, we're ready to hit the ground running with more community discussions and discussions with the whole council. And all of that can inform you know, the final year of this contract, and then hopefully the future of this contract as we continue to work with the sheriff's office. I think another important piece of information that will help us is at our next council meeting, having the district attorney attend and provide more information and insight into the process that goes into an investigation when there's an officer involved shooting or an incident, and hearing the council's questions for him and the public's questions for him. I think, again, just helps us to see the bigger picture. This is not a single issue that we're dealing with. It's, as many people have said, it's the culture of our community. It's how do we look at all of the issues we're dealing with and find the best way to serve the community and protect the community, which I know that Chief Lopez and our deputies, that's what they're here for. They're here to serve and protect and to keep everybody healthy and safe. And if we can help identify ways to do that in the right way in our community, I think that'll be the effective result of this. So we really appreciate, again, the efforts of staff, this subcommittee, who I know spends a lot of time thinking and asking questions about these particular issues, and ultimately the entire community and the entire council in this conversation in the future. And of course, thank you to Chief Lopez for joining us. This is not always easy, but he is, if anything, he's willing to listen, answer questions honestly, and engage with the community, and we really appreciate that.
And I just want to say, because there was talk on Nextdoor over the weekend about, you know, maybe we could effectively deal with the weekend beach issues if we had our own police department. And I just want to say again for the record, what a great deal going with the sheriff's office has been for the city of Half Moon Bay. Not just save us money, but the professionalism and with the personal contact we get with Captain Lopez. It's just been a great deal all around. And there have been a couple of bumps in the road, you know, we're talking about them today, but overall, it's the sheriff has been really good for Half Moon Bay.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the support.
Thank you. Members of the subcommittee, members of the public, we got our direction. Good wrap up by Matthew. I see your committee probably meeting again in around mid-November.
Good. Thank you all.
Good night, everybody.